And so after having come to know of the sinister agenda of the enemies of Islam and their tactics in trying to take us further and further away from our religion, it is important that we know the names and the goals of the modern day movements and ideologies that use these tactics to fulfill those agendas. And from those movements, dear brothers and sisters, is the feminist movement. A movement that portrays itself as fighting for women's rights and equality. A movement that portrays itself as fighting for justice for women all over the world after having witnessed the injustices women have faced in society for hundreds and hundreds of years. A movement that many women today, Muslims and otherwise, follow religiously because they are convinced and deluded to believe that this movement is what will empower them as women and make them feel worthy and important. And the reality of the matter is that this movement is no different than all of the other movements out there like it, that have a front they make apparent for the world to see, while they keep hidden the true purpose behind their sinister agenda. The first thing we must know about the feminist movement in its origin is its origin. The first thing that we should know about the feminist movement is its origin. When did it begin and where did it begin? Did it begin with the first wave of feminism that occurred in the West, as is taught to us in textbooks and documentaries? Or is there a more accurate time to when feminism was actually spread that is not mentioned in the history books? What is commonly mentioned in the history books is that the first wave of feminism began in approximately 1848 during the women's suffrage movement, which led to women being allowed to vote in the late 1800s to the beginning of the 1900s in several Western countries for the first time. And in places like America, they did not occur until after World War I in the 1920s. However, what is vital for every Muslim to know, and is important for every Muslim to know, and even more specifically the Muslim woman, is they are, as they are the target, that the feminist movement and the liberation of the women was a weapon used by the Western powers targeting women all over the world, such as in Africa, in China, and also the Native Americans. It was a plot to destroy those nations from within by convincing their women that they were oppressed and their rights were not being met, and that they, meaning these superpowers, would teach them what their rights were and how to achieve them. What is also important to know is that the feminist movement in its origin is a secular movement. And this means that it is void of any connection to a religion or a God. Its principles and these claimed rights and equalities that they are fighting for are not derived from the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Rather, they are derived by the logic and emotions and secular beliefs of atheists that in many cases do not believe in any God or any religion, and therefore only strive for what is in this world and have no concern for an afterlife. This explains why, in most cases, when we find sisters who may have been practicing once upon a time, being affected by the conditioning of the feminist movement, they more often than not go from practicing to no longer practicing. And even in many cases, from practicing to not practicing to leaving Islam altogether. And it's almost hand in hand. When we see a woman who was once practicing, a practicing sister, covering herself, attending the lessons, attending the masjid, right? Being introduced to the feminist movement and starting to become prey and fall prey to the agenda of the feminist movement, not realizing that she is nothing but a target, and not realizing what their true agenda is, she goes from not practicing to eventually leaving Islam because of the effect of the feminist movement and due to the reality of the feminist movement in having its origin in secularism, which is just another form of atheism. So this is because the foundation of the feminist movement, as was mentioned, is to remove you from any connection to a religion or to anything that derives its rules and guidelines from a divine being, such as Allah in the religion of Islam. This movement of the liberation of the woman, of the feminist movement, in reality began in Egypt and then spread to the rest of the Muslim lands. It calls to freeing the woman from the tenets and doctrine of Islam. And likewise, the Islamic beliefs that are specific to her, or the Islamic rulings that are specific to her, such as the hijab, disallowing plural marriage, the power of divorce being in the hand of the husband, abolishing that, equality in inheritance, and the blind following of the Western women. In its early stages in the 1800s, this movement spread in Egypt by way of women's associations and organizations, and then by way of books and magazines that were authored and published for the purpose of convincing Muslim women that the way that they were living in comparison to the Western women, who by the way, at that point in time, were not even seen as human beings. Their dictionaries were yet to have been updated and to include women in the definition of a person. And in the West, in that time, man was the only one known as a person. Women were not yet known as people or human beings, were not considered human beings. Let alone were considered to be equal to men. That they were telling women in that time, in the Muslim lands, or in Egypt specifically, that they were missing out. They were told that their lives of taking care of their families and being a pillar of the household was a form of humiliation, and that there was more to life than this. And so do not believe then that this is something only going on today, because we see now more and more people clocking on and starting to realize that there is something sinister going on. Not only the Muslims, but also the non-Muslims are waking up to this and are becoming aware of what is going on. And so do not believe that this is something that has been going on simply in the last 10 years or last 5 years. Rather, people have only woken up because the level of immorality, the level of evil has increased to such a level that people are now believing that there is no way that there is not an agenda behind this. And so the Muslims and non-Muslims alike, men and women alike, are now realizing that there is something going on that is causing or that is targeting women specifically. Targeting women specifically with a specific purpose. And so it would be shocking to find then that these books that were authored in that particular time, that were trying to convince women that they were missing out, and that a life as a mother and a life as a wife was not enough, and that there is more to life than this, were written by Christians. Not Muslims, but Christians. And these books and these authorships focused mainly on the hijab of the Muslim woman and how it has no basis in Islam in reality. The complete elimination of plural marriage, the free mixing of the Muslim woman with men, equality in the matter of divorce, the public beautification of women, and the fact that it was oppression for her not to do so. And so that they convinced women that were once covered in hijab that it is oppression that they be covered in hijab, and that liberation and freedom in reality was to remove that hijab and show your beauty for the world to enjoy. All the while using as evidence other non-Muslims, such as philosophers and atheists. From the very onset of the feminist movement in Egypt, they began with an obsession and focus on the modesty and chastity of the Muslim woman. That is where they began. They began by stripping her of her modesty and shame and throwing her into the pits of lewdness and immorality. This was clear and evident when an individual known as Sa'd Zaghlul, who was a head of a particular party in Egypt at the time, and aided in the spread and printing of these very books that were previously mentioned. This individual would invite women who were at the heads of these movements, these feminist movements, at the time to his sermons. He would have lectures and sermons, and he would invite these women to them. Women who were known lesbians at the time. He would invite them and they would attend wearing niqabs, and to make a statement, they would publicly remove their niqabs as a form of expressing their liberty and freedom as feminist women. And so this was a plot to spread this further amongst the rest of the Muslim women. And these women went from Muslim women who were once covered and married to lesbians who were at the head of the feminist movement, calling other Muslim women to express their liberty and freedom by way of removing their hijabs and exposing themselves to the world.